Hi class, this is chapter 15, Microbes in Agriculture, No Microbes, No Hamburgers. And that subtitle basically reflects that no microbes, no way to produce cattle or anything like that. Okay, so after reading this chapter, you should be able to explain the importance of nitrogen and the central role of microbes in the fixing of the nitrogen gas. Discuss the role of microbes in the nature of the ruminant digestion. Illustrate the role of microbes in milk and cheese production. And we've already talked about that in a previous chapter. Describe how DNA is inserted into plants. Assess the importance of bacterial insecticides. Illustrate what is meant by farm animals. Explain what is genetically modified foods. Uh, and contrasting those with veggie vaccines and edible vaccines. Um, so one of the first people to really identify uh, the function of microbes in agriculture was Martinus Bavinjic, um, and he believed in letting the fields lie furrow, or in other words, not planting plants can sometimes increase the uh, quality of the soil. Okay, and there are certain plants that are going to do that even more, as we'll detail in a minute. Okay. Um, and like I said, not planting on a field for a season or two is going to allow for more productive soil to be there. And one of the crops that are really good for um, establishing this more productive land is clover. And clovers are one of the kinds of crops that have nodules or have the bacteria rhizobium inside of them, and that's going to allow the soil to increase in nitrogen, which will of course benefit the plants. Okay. So there are some of the nodules um, on some roots, and again, inside of those nodules are a large collection of bacteria inside those nodules. Okay, and like I said, the nodules contain rhizobium bacterium, and those rhizobium are what are actually fixing the nitrogen from the atmosphere into a plant that, or into a place that, into a form that plants can use. Microbes on the farm. So um, we have to be thinking about the nitrogen cycle. And of course, nitrogen being one of the essential nutrients that any plant will need, and you need a lot of things. You need nitrogen for making uh, chlorophyll, the green pigments, um, and doing some of the reactions that are necessary. And while the air atmosphere is very high in N2, okay, the dinitrogen form, um, that's not a form that can be used directly by plants. So we have to go through the nitrogen cycle to be able to use it. And so we'll have certain types of microbes that are going to first convert that into ammonia, and then that ammonia can be converted into nitrates, and then those nitrates are going to go back up into in the atmosphere. So it's a circle um, where the nitrogen is vital, and it just has to go into the right form to be used uh, at certain times by the plants. So again, here are some of those root nodules, and just those nodules that you saw on one of the first pictures. Um, the nodules have a lot of uh, cells of a plant around them, okay, shown green in this picture, and then in the center of that, there are a bunch of the rhizobium uh, bacteria that are going to live inside that nodule. Okay, um, and you're going to uh, be able to uh, grow a lot of those bacteria inside that nodule. Um, Inside of the nodule, the rhizobium lose their cell walls, so they uh, don't. They're just called bacteroids because they don't actually have the cell wall anymore. And again, rhizobium is the bacterium that's present. Now, another place we can use bacteria on a farm is in the ruminant of certain animals. The first ruminant that generally comes to mind is a cow. Okay, and okay, so you might know that a cow has multiple intestines or multiple stomachs, and they're going to have a ruminant stomach and then a sort of uh, stomach for the vast majority of the bulk of the food they're eating. Um, and the bacteria are mainly living in the ruminant. Okay, um, the other foods will basically pass through the cow, and the ruminant is where all those bacteria are living um, to give the cattle additional food or additional nutrients. Okay, and here's a good diagram of how some of the biochemistry that's going on inside the ruminant are taking place. Um, Grass and things like grass are ingested by the cow, ground up, and then the cellulose and other polymer materials are going to go into the intestines, and uh, there's going to be a lot of production of gases, either CO2 or methane. Um, and in addition to that, there are going to be a lot of sugars and amino acids made. Okay, um, and the majority of the nutrition the animal gets is from those sugars and amino acids that are being uh, manufactured from the grass that they're eating. So milk is a suitable medium for the growth of microbes, and you partly know that because you keep your milk in the refrigerator. And remember, your milk is pasteurized But remember, pasteurization does not mean no microbes. It just means a reduction in the number of microbes. So pasteurized milk is not sterile. So one of the reasons that milk is such a good growth medium is it has lots of protein, carbohydrates, fats, and vitamins. Okay. And we can very easily ferment milk into suitable products. Um, Sour cream, yogurts um, are all products that can be made by fermentation from milk. Okay. So buttermilk, in that case, for buttermilk, you're going to add, again, some lactobacillus. You can make sour cream and yogurt. Um, again, lactobacillus and also Streptococcus thermophilus. Um, Streptococcus thermophilus is an interesting bacteria because, just like the name implies, thermophilus means it likes to grow at high temperature. So that's how you're actually getting a lot of the production of the yogurt by elevating the temperature, and the bacteria are allowed to grow quite high, uh, quite well then when the temperature is raises. Now, if we want to make milk, make cheeses from our milk, then we have to worry about cheese and curds and whey. Um, and of course, cheese is one of the most recognizable products for microbial action. And we can have all kinds of different cheeses based on the kind of uh, culture that's used to start the, uh, the start cheese. Okay. So one of the first things that will happen is the solids will turn into the curd, and then after we treat the curd, we can ripen it by adding other microbes, and each different kind of cheese has a certain kind of uh, curd, or sorry, of ripening that is transforming the curd. Okay. So cheeses that are unripened, your soft cheeses like cottage cheese. If you have a ripened cheese, these are your hard cheeses. Um, Things like a cheddar or something like that would be a cheese that a harder cheese that has different cultures added to it. Um, for the hard cheeses, one of the sort of golden rules is the the more it stinks, the more flavor it has. It might not be a flavor that you like, but in general, the hard cheeses have lots of flavor. And remember, take a look at the section of 15.2. Okay, it's no real surprise that biotechnology is coming to farming. So how do we even make transgenic plants? Okay, so to make a transgenic plant, you're somehow going to have to introduce some new DNA into that plant cell. And in this case, we are adding generally a new gene. Okay, um, so this can be a number of different things. We can use something like that, maybe uh, encode a vitamin to add the vitamin content to the plants. Um, Sometimes this can be done to uh, add another source of nitrogen to make the plants less reliant on nitrogen in the soil. And usually this is done through the bacterium, uh, Agrobacterium tumefacius. Um, and what you're doing is you're making a plasmid in the lab. It's a TI plasmid, um, and uh, those TI plasmids can then naturally recombine into the plant. Um, the bacteria that can do that are actually bacteria that can interact between the plant and the bacteria, and so that the foreign DNA can just get inserted into the plant. Okay. Um, One thing that is done quite commonly is to do an insecticide resistance. Um, so that actually means you can spray a plant or spray a field with an insecticide, get rid of all the insecticides, but the plants will be just fine because they've become resistant to that insecticide. Okay. Um, the bacteria that is most commonly used to introduce those foreign plasmids into the plant is Bacillus thuringiensis. And Bacillus thuringiensis, again, is a bacteria that can uh, mate with the plants, and so it'll enter through the roots of the plant and be able to transfer that plasmid into the plants. Um, Now, Bacillus thuringiensis um, does make a number of naturally occurring insecticides, and the uh, Bacillus species has a certain gene that has that toxin present on it. Okay. And the Bacillus thuringiensis, those toxins should be both harmless to plants and to animals. Um, they're very specific in that they're only killing the caterpillars of the insects, and that's generally when a uh, insect will be able to eat the most and damage the plant the most when it's an insect. And like it says, your plant will now become naturally resistant to the insecticide larvae. Um, Again, as adult um, moths or something like that, it won't affect the moth, but it'll affect the larvae of that moth. Now, herbicides are things that are going to be able to kill uh, weeds, um, and Roundup is one of the major players in that field. Um, just millions and millions of gallons of Roundup are sprayed into crops annually. Now, we can take the gene from E. coli and use them to introduce it into tobacco and to soybeans to make the tobacco and the soybeans resistant to the Roundup. So in general, if we want to make a farm animal, PHARM animal, um, we need to introduce new genes into the bacteria that are being used. Okay, so the bacteria are producing the gene product. Okay. One place this is very widely used is in bovine growth serum. Um, and again, the uh, gene is first made in E. coli and then expressed and used to inject into the animal. Okay. Now, when they have the BSE uh, or BST, um, they're going to promote bone and muscle growth and also increase milk production. Um, there is some controversy whether or not this can produce cancer in some humans. Um, in a way, it makes sense that it could cause cancer because cancer is an uncontrolled growth. And again, you're adding something here to try to increase the growth of the organism that the BST is uh, being injected into. Um, I don't know that there's a clear link between the BST and human cancers. Okay. So we've heard a lot about GMO foods. So GMO just means genetically modified organisms or genetically modified foods. And we can add things um, like things that will add increase the flavor, like the flavor saver tomatoes, canola oil, yellow squash. These are all things that have been made GMO. Okay. Um, 60 to 70% of foods processed uh, and processed foods have some sort of genetically modified ingredient. Um, a lot of times that is a genetically modified wheat, um, so that it just has a much longer shelf life. Okay, some other plants that use biotechnology. Um, Other genes have been engineered into plants to provide some help to society. Um, Rice, one of the big rice crops is uh, a yellow rice, where they put the genes for producing beta carotene into the rice, so the rice becomes yellow, and rice becomes sort of a complete food um, when you have that genetically engineered uh, gene into the rice. Okay. Um, we can do things like produce certain antibodies, um, things like tomatoes and potatoes um, can have use interferon or produce interferon. Transgenic fruits and vegetables. Um, we can make veggie vaccines, so the vaccines don't have to actually go into to an animal source to be able to produce antibodies. That makes them edible vaccines. Okay, so what should you have learned from this lesson? The role of microbes in the nitrogen cycling, ruminant digestion, dairy product, and cheese making. The use of microbes in the engineering of transgenic plants and uh, the products that come from such plants. Use of microbes in the production of farm animals. Biotechnology of genetically modified foods. Use of vegetables and fruits to produce veggie vaccines. And leave this as a thought question for you. What biotech farm products have you have personal experience with? All right, think about that one for a while. All right, thanks.